What's up, guys? Today we'll be reading some interesting and dark stories, so please give me a like and enjoy. 3 Days in the Dark. When I was 8 years old, my brother Elliot went missing. He was just 13 years old, but older siblings have this aspirational quality to them. He just didn't come home one day. They looked for days but couldn't find any trace of him. I was too young to understand what was going on, so I had to sit in my room enforcement and informed them that I'd gladly volunteer. I figured notified of a social media post pointing at the approximate location, but the details were sketchy. To help with the search, power had been restored to this part of the tunnels. Most of the emergency lights were meant to last for years, so there shouldn't be too much of a problem getting around. We were assigned into sections and teams where we were instructed to only follow lit up corridors and hallways. However, as parts of the station had been abandoned mid-construction, there would be dark sections that were unfinished. If we found such an area, we were ordered to call it in and ask for further instructions. And with that, we were off. I was a bit miffed about not getting to see the abandoned station platform. That thing was supposed to be huge. Instead, I was assigned to one of the maintenance tunnels. It was originally meant to house heating pipes, but the pipes were never added. Instead, there were these lines across the wall and the occasional holes in the ceiling. You could tell they must have been surprised about the project shutting down. At the end of hallway. Already there. Right hand wall, other corridor. Got it. I followed their instructions, grasping the dying flashlight. As I got to the seemingly endless tunnel, the light finally gave out. It was pitch black. I could close my eyes, and nothing would change. Being in that kind of darkness is so disorienting. You start to imagine how easy it is to get turned around, to the point where you're wondering if you really are turned around. But I kept my hand on the wall and stuck to the right. "Is it far?" I asked. "I can't hear them." "It's a bit of a walk. There should be some functioning pipes running overhead about halfway through, so let me know as soon as you hear running water." I couldn't hear anything but my own breathing reverberating down the hall, but if there was running water down there, I wouldn't miss it for the world. I kept my hand on the smooth concrete wall and continued a step at a time. You have to go slow, as even the slightest shift in elevation can send you crashing face first into the ground. When you're exposed to that kind of prolonged darkness, your head kind of fills in the blanks. You start to imagine what the space around you looks like. It plays tricks on you. For example, I started thinking I was running my hand across wallpaper instead of concrete. It was smooth enough that, while walking, you might trick yourself. But if you're just using your fingertips to see the world, you can imagine yourself in all kinds of places. My childhood home had a rough paper, textured wallpaper. It didn't take a huge leap of imagination to pretend I was back there, sneaking up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. I ended up taking my gloves off just to get a better idea of what I was touching. I got to a fork in the road and still hadn't heard any running water. I pulled up the radio and called it in. "There's a split here," I said. "Should I stay right or go straight ahead?" "A split?" the operator called back. "There shouldn't be a split, are you sure?" "Yeah, there's a split, straight ahead, or another right." "Wait," the voice mumbled back. Wait, don't tell me. Is the ceiling really low?" "Yes." "Why didn't you say so?" "Oh man, this changes things." I could hear them talking to someone in the background, forgetting to take their hands off the button. Then they returned to me. "This is gonna get complicated." Turns out there were 3 other rooms with the same description as mine, and neither of them were in the sections I described. I must have veered far off course. I had to walk around to gather data points to identify which of the rooms I was in, but it proved more difficult than they'd imagined. For example, one of the corridors was supposed to lead to a junction, and another would lead to a ceiling grate. However, the room at the end of the corridor was incomplete, meaning we couldn't tell what it was supposed to be. I had to go deeper to figure out where I was. I would occasionally run into ladders, but they lead nowhere. There were supposed to be entrances from the street, but these had long since been filled and paved. I still had to climb each one, just to make sure they hadn't missed one. The mask on my face felt more and more oppressive, like my body was packed into a box. Despite being able to move my arms around, I could feel this claustrophobic stone building in my chest, hammering a countertune to my increasing heartbeat. If I listened to it too much, I couldn't breathe. I pushed myself down another corridor, only to stop at a dead end. There was a round hole in the wall, just big enough for someone my size. That's good," the operator assured me. "That means there's space for heating. If my calculations are correct, that means you are in one of these 2 hallways. I need you to go inside." "No way." "It's gonna tilt downward for about 5 feet and either go straight ahead or upward. If it goes upward, you can go straight to the top. I can have someone meet you right then and there. If it goes forward, you have to go ahead, then take a left, and then forward again. That'd put you in the same corridor as me. Either way, you have to push through." I put one knee up and traced the edges of the hole. It was too small for me to crawl on all 4s. I had to put my torso in and drag myself forward with the palm of my hands. The concrete was so smooth I couldn't get a grip with my fingers, gloves or no gloves. My gear kept getting snagged on the edges. I stopped to have a drink of water and splashed a little on my face, psyching myself up. 5 feet, then up or forward. That was it. I crawled in, inches at a time. I had to stay calm. If I tried to take a deep breath, I could feel my gear pushing against the walls. It didn't hurt, but it was this constant reminder of how isolated I was. My heart was beating through my ears, with nothing to distract from it. There wasn't the slightest hint of an echo. I felt the tunnel tilt slightly downward, not much, but enough that pushing myself back up would be impossible. If I went ahead, I wouldn't be getting back up. Not unless I got space to turn around. "You sure it's just a couple feet?" I asked. "You absolutely sure?" There are only 2 rooms with that kind of vent. No matter which one you're in or which direction you're coming from, you'll be out shortly. I swallowed. I could feel the sweat stinging my eyes. I wanted to throw my mask away, like that was the thing keeping me back, but I had to stay rational. I pushed myself forward and slid downward. The tunnel evened out. I felt around for an upward exit, but couldn't find one. That meant we'd isolated exactly where I was, and I had to push forward. My palms were so dusty that I could barely get a grip. I had to resort to rolling onto my back and use the rubber soles on my shoes for traction, effectively kicking myself backward. I could feel the heat of my breath gathering along the tunnel walls. Then the tunnel opened. It was so sudden that I lost my balance, haphazardly falling out headfirst. I did an awkward flip, landing hard on my left hip and shoulder. It wasn't a long fall, but enough for something to get sprained. I didn't want to imagine what the bruise might look like. I grabbed my radio and held onto it for dear life. "I'm out," I groaned. "I made it to a room. There's only one way forward," the operator said. "Go forward, then a left, and forward again. Once you see the light, let me know. I'm right at the other end." "That's it? That's really it? There's no other possible way." I got up, dusted myself off, and checked my gear. It was all there. Things would be okay. I followed the instructions, I went forward, and took left. At the next fork, I went straight ahead, double checking with the operator every step of the way. They assured me it was just around the corner, a matter of minutes, at most. At one point, he said he was banging a wrench on a pipe and that I would be able to hear it any minute now. Now I just had to go straight until I came to a door. I was jogging, keeping my hand on the wall for balance. There were these small gaps in the wall every 10 feet or so where there was supposed to be space for pipes. I'd walk, feel the gap, walk, feel the gap, over and over. Then I dragged my hand across someone's face. Open eyes, a nose, teeth, and hair. I stopped and turned around, my hand shaking like I'd touched a flame. "Is anyone there?" I asked. There was no answer. I debated within my own head, trying to figure out if I should head back and check again, or keep going. Maybe it was the missing person? We were still out looking for someone, after all. The search hadn't been called off. I took a couple of steps back and carefully reached out with my right hand. My fingers were anticipating the touch of skin, to the point where I could imagine their heat. But as I reached further, all I felt was concrete. There was no one there. I checked thoroughly, but there was nothing. I did hear a little metallic sound though, as something stuck to my shoe. A small key. It had some kind of etched motif, like a sunflower, maybe a blue one. I put it in my pocket with my first aid kit and kept going, making sure I hadn't been turned around. As I got to the end of the hallway, I reached for the door. "All right, this is it," I said. "I can't hear you, but I'm at the end of the hall. There's a door there. Just open it and I'll have someone come meet you." I fumbled around looking for a handle, but couldn't find one. I checked that wall 3 times, every inch of it. It was a dead end. "There's nothing here," I gasped. "There's nothing here. Calm down. It should be on your left." There's nothing on my left, nothing on my right. It's a dead end. It's a goddamn... I smacked my head with the radio and heard a click. Not as in something breaking, but something clicking into place. I turned the radio over in my hand, feeling around the back. The battery cover had been slightly off. That hit had put it back in place. I opened the cover just to make sure I closed it correctly. There were no batteries in the radio. I double and triple checked. There were no batteries. "Hello?" I asked. "Operator?" I held the radio up to my lips, clicking the receiver a couple of times. There was no sound, just the clack of plastic. "Hello?" There was no response. I collapsed against the wall, taking a moment to collect my thoughts. It didn't make sense. The battery cover had been closed. Even when I smacked my head with the radio, I would have heard 2 batteries tumbling to the floor. I couldn't have lost them earlier, as then the operator couldn't have talked to me in the corridor. Something wasn't adding up. I swept my hands across the floor, checking to see if the batteries were there somewhere. They weren't, but I couldn't just sit in the dark and wait either. I had to do something, try something. This was another puzzle to figure out. There is always a solution, and sometimes you just have to make the best of the hand you're dealt. By this time, I'd drawn a mental map. All these years of figuring things out had conditioned me to collect and preserve information. It was like recounting the alphabet backwards. I just had to follow a learned sequence. I decided I was going to backtrack and try to find my way back to where I started. I made my way back to the hole in the wall and climbed inside. The upward tilt would be difficult, but I was confident that I could make it. I crawled, holding my hands out, only to feel the tunnel dip downward. I stopped dead in my tracks, my mind spinning. This was impossible. I'd been crawling down. It couldn't possibly lead further down. I crawled a little further, reaching with a full arm. This couldn't have been where I came from. Were there 2 separate tunnels? That was the only explanation. I pushed myself all the way back out, but couldn't find a second hole in the wall. I figured I must have been turned around somewhere, taken a wrong turn, went straight instead of right at a split, something like that. I had to slowly and methodically map out my surroundings, one room and hallway at a time. It's easy to second guess yourself in the dark. You have nothing to rely on but your thoughts and impressions, and those are easy to misunderstand. It can be challenging even in a familiar environment. Ask anyone who's had to go to the bathroom during a power outage. I was somewhere deep underground, in an unmapped area, without light or direction. I must have wandered for hours. I mapped out 2 branching corridors leading to 3 rooms and 4 dead ends. There were no doors and only one hole in the wall leading to a tunnel. And yes, I checked it again. It kept going downward. No, I didn't proceed that way. I ended up in one of the smaller rooms, rolling up my high visibility vest into a pillow. I drank some water, but saved some for later and chowed down on a chocolate bar. The others were probably looking for me by now. I tried not to think about the radio. That was a piece of the puzzle that made my stomach roll. No matter how I twisted and turned that thought, I couldn't get it to make sense. If it was empty all along, I was the problem. If it wasn't empty until that last click of the battery cover, there had to be batteries on the floor. I couldn't find any, but that didn't mean there weren't any. And yet, I didn't have a clear answer. I ended up spending the night down there. It's difficult to sleep in that kind of darkness. After a while, you don't know if your eyes are open or closed. You don't know if you're sleeping or not. The barrier between imagination and reality is paper thin, and you start thinking whatever you dream about is really there. There could be someone in the room, just inches away, and I would have no way to know for sure. It was the first time in many years that I thought about Elliot. Not just the reality of him going missing, but him as a person. I imagined what he might have felt like during those last few hours or days. Had there been someone with him, or had he faded away in the dark? He and I had always been very similar. Chances are we would think the same thing in our final moments. And if this was one of my final moments, I was scared. He would be too. I tried not to think about it. There was no way to know for sure, and imagining the worst wasn't helping anyone. He could have run away, eloped with a pretty girl, and lived in some hippie co-op. He might resurface in 20 years. You can't tell the future. But somehow, a part of me felt like it knew. It knew he'd gone someplace dark, where he could never come back. Maybe it was the next day, or just a couple of hours, but at some point I got up. I decided I was going to check the tunnel again. There must have been some kind of misunderstanding. I drank my last gulp of water and followed the map in my mind. The layout was different. There were more rooms and shorter corridors. If you took 2 lefts, there were a couple of stairs. There was a larger room with a rounded floor for draining liquid. I would go down the same hallway twice, and I could swear it was different lengths. I would count my steps and end up with the same result, but one would take a minute to pass, and the next it would take 2. I felt like I was losing my mind. Every time I tried to make clear sense of that place, it seemed to shift and change, like it wasn't finished in more ways than one, like an approximation of space and dimension. After my 3rd pass around the same rooms and still not making any sense of it, I took a break. I was leaning back, tapping the back of my head against the wall as if trying to dislodge a good idea. Instead, I picked up the radio, clicking the receiver and turning the dials. Now it was just a plastic brick, no better than a paperweight. I checked the back, unlatching the battery cover. Still empty. Then, a noise. There's a way out, you know. The crackling voice came from the radio, but there was something about it that resonated within me, like the reverb was tickling the back of my mind. "You're not real," I mumbled. "I'm hallucinating." "Are you sure?" It's like a sensory deprivation tank. If your senses stop getting input, your brain starts firing random signals just to keep them occupied. Otherwise, it sort of atrophies. "So, I'm just a random brain signal?" "I would suppose so." "Interesting," the voice continued. "So that means whatever I say is an expression of yourself." "No, it's random noise. You might as well be a cat's meow or a leaf in the wind." "But what do I sound like to you? Try to categorize me, make sense of me. Who am I?" The voice was a man. Age was difficult to tell through a radio, but I was guessing they weren't a teenager or a senior, adult or middle-aged, with a slight hint of an accent similar to my own. That was a curious choice. "Where's that accent from?" I asked. "Wherever you want it to be from." Cute deflection. I wonder why I'm imagining you like that. Maybe you're trying to express something. Why would I care about some random person with an accent? Maybe I'm not a random person. I leaned the radio away, closed my eyes, and shook my head. "Don't do that," I whispered. "Don't say things like that." I wandered the dark for a bit, desperately trying to make sense of my surroundings. The number of steps on the stairs were different. The corridor turned right instead of left. The ceiling was lower, and the angle of the tilt in the floor of the big room was deeper. I thought I felt a door handle, but upon doubling back, I realized it was a clasp for a missing pipe. I talked out loud all that time, getting the occasional response from the radio. I knew it wasn't real, but it kept me from digesting random thoughts into something rancid. I had to stay focused on the task ahead and find a way forward. There had to be a way forward. There's no such thing as an impossible space. The operator wasn't trying to get in my head or make wild claims. Most of the time he was just listening, adding the occasional remark when I made an incorrect statement or misinformed decision. And when I came back to the same room I'd already been in for the umpteenth time, tearing my own hair out with frustration, that voice came through loud and clear. Do you want a suggestion? You're not real. Then what's the harm? It doesn't make sense, I snapped back. I'm talking to a wall. Anything that comes from this is, at best, accidental. You have any better ideas? I flung the radio across the room, shattering it against the wall on the other side. I heard the plastic clatter and roll down the tilted floor, pooling at a small grate in the center of the room. Some of the smaller pieces trickled through. I pushed my hands against my ears, trying to clear my thoughts. Are you done? The voice wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It was resonating through me, like my bones were picking up a radio signal. I didn't know what to say. Before I could open my mouth, it answered for me. Then let's get going. I was out of ideas. My tongue was going dry, and my head was swimming from prolonged stress. I could feel this sense of exhaustion seeping into my bones, turning my movements slow and sloppy. I was dragging my feet and not even touching the walls anymore. If I stumbled or walked into something that was on me, that was fine. The operator mentioned a few suggestions. Take a left turn instead of going forward. Stick to the right. 3 steps back, sharp left. When I could be bothered to filter out that voice from the screaming in the back of my mind, I did as I was told. And slowly but surely, I began to notice things changing. There were different rooms, and the air grew denser. There was a strange smell in the air. The concrete started to feel different, more porous. Maybe this wasn't better, but at least it was new. I started hearing strange noises. There were machines overhead, pressured air rushing just out of sight, flowing water. Why'd you lead me down here? I asked. You tricked me into this. You were already tricked, the voice responded. I've been trying to get you out, but it shifts things around. You told me I could go in and that there were people backing me up. I was trying to put you at ease while I figured this out. Figured what out? What are we doing here? It wants you to go a certain way. Haven't you ever wondered why you're always drawn to look in places you weren't supposed to? It wants you to find it. And now you're very close to doing so. And trust me, you don't want that. Why not? I said, shrugging. Why don't I want that? Because I know what happens when you go too far, when you can't turn back. Things like this wants to be found in deep, dark places. I smacked the side of my head as if trying to get better reception in my mind, like that would somehow filter out the nonsense. I came down another fork in the path, left and right. I turned right as the operator rolled back in my ear. Go the other way, he said. You're getting too close. You gotta turn away. I didn't listen. I kept going forward until I could hear something. There were noises ahead, chatter. My heart raced as I rushed forward. Please, turn around, the operator asked. Turn around, right now. I could hear people talking. I turned a corner, and for the first time in days, I could see a door. There was a faint light coming from underneath, and I could hear people walking around in the other room. I ran up to it and pushed down on the handle. Someone on the other side was calling out, asking if anyone was there. The key, the operator begged. I left you a key. I pushed down on the handle and stopped. Fumbling around with my right hand, I could feel the key still in my pocket. I'd completely forgotten about it. There is a way out, but this ain't it. I promise you, this ain't it. Please don't do this. Please don't go that way. Why not? I whispered. They're right there. It's not real. I made the same mistake. Don't go in. My hand stayed on the handle. Someone urged me to open it. Someone asked me to take a peek. They were laughing with relief, saying how pleased they were to finally have found me. But something didn't feel right. I stepped back. Open the door on your end, I said out loud. It's not working. There wasn't as much as a tug on the handle. They came with excuses. Someone had their hands full. Someone said it didn't open from their end. Someone pretended not to hear me. The key in my pocket felt heavier as I traced the outline of the etched sunflower with my thumb. This was real. That was a real thing. What was on the other side of that door wasn't. I stepped back, and as I did, the light behind the door vanished. The voices disappeared, leaving the hallway suddenly, deathly quiet. "What do I do?" I whispered. "What do I do?" The operator whispered back, "Go the other way and don't stop for nothing." I turned around and ran as a door creaked behind me. I heard wet skin slapping against the concrete floor, stumbling forward at an awkward pace. I headed straight, then took a sharp right. The air was growing more dense, more warm. I traced my hand along the right wall, only for it to shift. The concrete grew hot and soft, like sand from the beach. Then the grains turned fine, until it was more like a sludge. It was like dragging your hand across raw chicken. "It wants you to stop," the operator said. "It's trying to distract you. Keep going." The hallway would contract and expand like a breathing entity. At times, the floor would roll, as if trying to swallow me. I could feel it tilt in different angles, making the way forward twist and turn. One moment, I'm going forward. Next moment, the hallway tilted upward, and I'm using ridges in the floor to climb a makeshift ladder. Then, I'm falling on my back, holding on for dear life as I'm thrown this way and that. All the while, something at the bottom is waiting for me to drop. Something that came out of that door and who's tired of playing games. I was soaking wet when I came to what felt like a dead end. There was this slimy substance covering the wall, but I could push against it. It felt like trying to pop a soap-drenched balloon. Using scissors from the first aid kit, I managed to cut a big enough hole for my hand to fit and rip all the way through. As I did, everything rolled again, as something screamed in pain. Not with sound, but with movement, convulsion, and heat. I could feel the compressed air press against my eardrums, making my sense of balance shiver. There was a door at the end of the hallway. It was chained. "This is it," the operator said. Get the key, and go." It was coming down the hall, heading straight for me. It was so fast. How could it be so fast? I reached for my key and felt around for a lock. There was one. I slotted the key in, turned, and pulled. There was a click, and the chain rattled to the floor. As I swung the door open and dashed through, I turned around for a moment just to close it behind me. As I did, I saw something staring back at me from the dark. Something with milk-white skin and atrophied eyes and the wild-grown maw of an invertebrate predator. The door closed, and I stepped back, catching my breath. There was light here. The operator came through, but the voice was barely reaching me. I could hear scratches, like interference, like I was just out of reach. "Just keep going," he said. "Not far. Got it from here." "What about you?" I asked. "Are you still in there?" "Went the wrong way." I paused for a moment, looking back. The light was faint, but my eyes were still adjusting. I couldn't focus. "Is that you?" I asked. "I mean, really you?" There was a short pause as the world came into view. The operator thought about it for a moment, then sighed. "Is what it is," he said. "Later, Gator." I followed the sound of machinery and wandered straight out onto a platform. Early commuters saw me wandering out of a maintenance tunnel, and I was approached by a janitor. I wasn't making any sense at that point. When law enforcement came to pick me up, I was delirious. It took them hours to identify me, and I was of little help. I'd been wandering down there for almost 3 full days. I was dehydrated. They had found the missing urban explorer and shifted their rescue attempt to me, trying to figure out exactly where I'd gone off the beaten path. No one managed to find the black door that I was describing, or the corridor where it was supposed to have been. Retracing my steps seemed impossible, as nothing was the way I described it. They couldn't explain what I'd experienced. My clothes were covered in a thin layer of hydrochloric acid and potassium chloride in a mix similar to gastric acid, like I'd been walking through a massive, diluted stomach. There were interviews, questionnaires, and even a short article in a local newspaper. Most wanted to talk about the fear of being lost in the dark and what it does to your mind. It lost its novelty after about a week, and I was back at work like nothing happened. I still do search and rescue on a volunteer basis sometimes. I'm a bit more careful, sure, but you can't change what you are overnight, and yet I think something has changed. I'm asking different questions nowadays, and I'm not sure I want an answer. I can't say for sure what I was doing during those 3 days or what I experienced, but I know what I heard. I know I wasn't alone. And in those rare moments where I think it was all some fake, made-up nonsense from the back of my mind, I look into the top drawer in my nightstand. That's where I keep a small key with an edged sunflower that someone left for me in the dark. I work for the county. I just rescued an elderly woman from a situation that I am actively covering up. I work as a social worker for the County Adult Protective Services Division. My job consists entirely of stepping into situations that other people would rather ignore. I deal with severe neglect, extreme hoarding, cognitive decline, and most commonly, financial exploitation. When an elderly person has a steady pension and a house that is fully paid off, the worst elements of human nature tend to surface. Usually it is a distant relative who moves in to help out and ends up draining the bank accounts. It is a miserable, exhausting profession, and it teaches you very quickly to trust your instincts when something feels wrong. The file landed on my desk on a late Tuesday afternoon. The referral was classified as an anonymous tip from a concerned neighbor. The details were sparse but alarming. An elderly woman, a widow living entirely alone on the far edge of the county line, had not been seen outside her home for nearly 6 months. She used to maintain a large vegetable garden in her front yard, but it had completely overgrown with weeds. The neighbor noted that the woman's monthly pension checks were still being cashed at the local bank. They were being deposited by a younger man claiming to be her grandson, and occasionally by a woman claiming to be her daughter. According to the county records attached to the file, the elderly woman did not have any living children. Her only daughter had passed away decades ago, and she had no grandchildren. I printed the documents, grabbed my agency clipboard, and walked out to my car. The drive to her property took nearly an hour. The town slowly gave way to sparse, rural development, which eventually transitioned into heavy, dense forest. The road narrowed into a cracked, unpaved dirt path. The trees here grew incredibly close to the shoulder, their heavy branches interlocking over the road to block out most of the late afternoon sunlight. The house sat at the very end of the dirt road, positioned mere feet away from the heavy tree line. The forest seemed to lean over the property, casting long, dark shadows across the rotting wood of the front porch. The vegetable garden was completely dead, choked out by aggressive briars and thick vines. I parked my car in the gravel driveway, shut off the engine, and sat in the silence for a moment. There were no birds singing. The air felt heavy and incredibly still. I stepped out of the car and walked up to the front porch, then raised my hand and knocked firmly on the front door, announcing my title and the agency I worked for. I waited for a full minute. There was no movement inside. I raised my fist to knock again, but before my knuckles could strike the wood, the door swung open smoothly. Standing in the doorway were two people, a woman who looked to be in her mid-40s and a young man who looked to be in his early 20s. They were both dressed in remarkably clean, casual clothing. The woman wore a floral blouse and pressed slacks. The young man wore a plain gray sweater and dark jeans. At first glance, they looked like an ordinary, well-kept family. But as I stood on the porch looking at them, a deep, primal wave of unease washed over my entire body. My brain instantly registered that I was looking at something wrong, even before I could articulate exactly what it was. It was their posture. They stood side by side, perfectly straight, with their arms resting entirely limp at their sides. They were not leaning against the doorframe or shifting their weight. They were entirely motionless. "Good afternoon," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I am a social worker with the county. I am here to conduct a wellness check on the homeowner. May I come in?" The woman smiled. "Good afternoon," she said. "You are here to conduct a wellness check." She repeated my sentence back to me, but the cadence was off. "Yes," I replied, gripping my clipboard a little tighter. "I need to speak with her directly. Are you her family members?" The young man smiled. "We are her family members. I am the grandson. She is the daughter. We provide excellent care." "I appreciate that," I said, forcing myself to maintain eye contact. "But standard procedure requires me to speak with her in private. It will only take a few minutes." I took a deliberate step forward, pushing my weight slightly toward the threshold. Usually, people will naturally step back to allow someone entry. The woman and the young man did not move. They held their ground, standing like statues in the doorway. "She is resting," the daughter said. "She does not wish to speak in private." "I am afraid it is not optional," I said firmly. I relied on the authority of my position, pushing past my growing fear. "If you refuse to allow me access to the homeowner, I will have to return with law enforcement. It is much easier if you just let me see her." The daughter and the grandson slowly turned their heads to look at each other. "You may speak with her," the grandson said. They finally stepped backward, opening a path for me to enter the house. I stepped over the threshold into the living room. The house was clean, but it was sterile in a way that felt completely unnatural. There was no clutter, no personal items, no mail on the tables. It looked like a stage set. "She is in the bedroom," the daughter said, pointing a stiff finger down a narrow hallway. I walked down the hall, keeping my back to the wall so I could keep them in my peripheral vision. They remained standing in the living room, watching me go. I reached the end of the hallway and pushed open the bedroom door. The curtains were drawn tight, blocking out the light, and the room was illuminated only by a small bedside lamp. Lying in the center of a large bed was the elderly woman. The breath caught in my throat. She was severely emaciated. Her skin was stretched tight over her bones, paper thin and heavily bruised. She looked incredibly frail, as if a strong breeze would shatter her completely. Her eyes were wide, sunken deep into her skull, and darting frantically around the room. I stepped into the bedroom and quickly pulled the door shut behind me, engaging the small push-button lock on the knob. It was a flimsy lock, but it gave me a moment of separation. I walked up to the side of her bed. "Ma'am," I whispered gently. "I am a social worker with the county. I am here to make sure you are safe. Can you hear me?" The old woman stared at me, her chest heaved with rapid, shallow breaths. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a dry, rasping sound came out. She raised her trembling, bruised hand and pointed weakly toward my clipboard. I stepped closer, unclipped the metal clasp, and handed her the stack of blank agency forms and my pen. She grabbed the pen with a desperate grip. Her hand shook violently as she pressed the ballpoint against the paper. She wrote quickly, pressing so hard the ink tore through the top sheet. She finished writing, dropped the pen onto the blanket, and pushed the clipboard back toward my chest. Her eyes were wide with terror, pleading with me to understand. I looked down at the paper. Written in jagged, frantic letters was a single sentence. They aren't my family. They came from the woods. A heavy, freezing chill ran down my spine. Suddenly, a sharp, hard knock echoed against the bedroom door. Is the wellness check complete? It was the daughter's voice. It sounded incredibly close, as if her mouth was pressed directly against the wood of the door. I moved to the center of the room, keeping my voice as calm as possible. I need a few more minutes. I called out. We are still completing the paperwork. She is tired, the grandson's voice said from the hallway. She needs to rest. You must leave the bedroom now. The brass doorknob slowly began to turn. It hit the mechanism of the push-button lock and stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, the doorknob twisted violently in the other direction. The cheap metal rattled aggressively against the door frame. They were testing the lock. Open the door, the daughter said. Her voice had dropped its pleasant tone. We provide excellent care. You must leave. I knew that if I opened that door, I was not going to walk out of the house alive, and neither was the old woman. I looked around the bedroom for another exit. There was a single, large sash window on the far wall, looking out toward the front yard and my parked car. I rushed to the window and grabbed the heavy brass latches. They were stiff with age and coated in thick layers of old paint. I slammed the heel of my hand against the wooden frame, breaking the seal of the paint. I threw my weight backward, hauling the lower pane of the window upward. It slid open with a loud groan of protesting wood. The doorknob rattled furiously. Open the door, the voices outside chanted in perfect, terrifying unison. Open the door, open the door. Heavy thuds began to slam against the wood. They were hitting the door, trying to force it off its hinges. The thin wood began to bow inward with every strike. I ran back to the bed. I did not have time to be gentle. I am getting you out of here, I whispered rapidly to the old woman. Do not make a sound. Hold on to me as tight as you can. I reached under her fragile frame, sliding one arm beneath her knees and the other around her back. I hoisted her upward. She weighed almost nothing. She was incredibly light, like carrying a bundle of dried, brittle branches. She wrapped her thin arms tightly around my neck, burying her face into my shoulder. I turned back to the open window. The bedroom door cracked loudly. A long splinter of wood fractured down the center of the panel. I threw my leg over the windowsill, balancing the weight of the old woman against my chest. I ducked my head and slid through the open frame, dropping down onto the overgrown grass of the front yard. The impact jarred my knees, but I kept my footing. I turned and sprinted toward my car. I kept one arm securely around the woman's legs, using my free hand to reach frantically into my pocket for my car keys. My fingers fumbled against the metal as I ran across the gravel driveway. I reached the driver's side door. I hit the unlock button on the key fob. The headlights flashed briefly, and the locks disengaged with a sharp click. I pulled the rear door open, carefully but swiftly pushing the old woman into the back seat. I slammed the door shut, threw myself into the driver's seat, and shoved the key into the ignition. The engine roared. I threw the transmission into reverse and looked up through the windshield. The front door of the house was wide open. Standing on the rotting wooden porch, illuminated by the fading afternoon light, were the daughter and the grandson. They were just standing there, side by side, completely motionless. Their arms were hanging limp. Their faces were locked in that same empty smile. They were watching me. I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal. The tires spun aggressively against the loose gravel, kicking up a shower of rocks as the car launched backward. I whipped the steering wheel around, aligning the hood of the car with the dirt road, shifted into drive, and floored the accelerator. The car surged forward. The heavy tree line blurred past my windows as I sped down the narrow, cracked path. I checked the rearview mirror constantly. The house grew smaller in the distance. The figures on the porch did not move. I let out a harsh, shaking breath. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I glanced at the back seat. The old woman was lying flat across the upholstery, her eyes squeezed shut, trembling violently. "We are okay," I told her, my voice cracking. "I am taking you straight to the county hospital. You are safe now." I looked back up at the road ahead. I checked the rearview mirror one more time to make sure nothing was following us. The dirt road behind me was empty. Then, a sudden flicker of movement in the mirror caught my eye. It was coming from the thick tree canopy directly above the road behind my car. I saw the grandson. He had moved through the trees. I watched in disbelief as he stepped off a massive oak branch towering at least 40 feet above the ground. He bent his knees and launched himself forward into the air. The physics of the jump were entirely, horrifyingly wrong. It was a massive leap that defied gravity. He sailed through the air, traveling faster than my speeding car, easily clearing the distance between the trees and my rear bumper. He soared directly over the roof of my vehicle. A heavy shadow passed over the windshield, then landed on the asphalt directly in front of my moving car. The impact should have shattered his legs. He fell from an impossible height, hitting the solid ground with devastating force. But he did not stumble or even roll. He landed perfectly on his feet. Less than a second later, a second shadow dropped from the canopy. The daughter landed right beside him, executing the exact same impossible silent landing. They stood shoulder to shoulder, completely blocking the narrow dirt road. I slammed both of my feet down onto the brake pedal. The anti-lock brakes engaged aggressively, grinding and shuddering as the tires locked up. The car skidded violently across the dirt and asphalt, the heavy momentum pushing us forward. We slid to a halt less than 10 feet away from where they were standing. The dust settled around the hood of my car. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, my chest heaving, staring through the windshield. They had not flinched when the car skidded toward them. They stood perfectly still, but the smiles were gone, replaced by a cold, flat expression of mild annoyance. They began to walk toward my car. They walked up to the driver's side door and stopped just outside my window. The daughter raised her hand. She tapped her knuckles gently against the glass. "Lower the window politely," she said. Her voice was muffled by the glass, but the hollow resonance was unmistakable. I did not move. My mind raced, trying to calculate a way out. I could not reverse. The road was too narrow, and the ditches on either side were too deep. If I tried to run them over, based on what I had just seen them do, I doubted the impact of the car would stop them. I slowly reached over and pressed the button to roll the window down exactly 2 inches, just enough to hear them clearly. "What do you want?" I demanded, trying to keep the absolute terror out of my voice. The grandson leaned down, positioning his eyes level with the narrow gap in the window. "You must leave the old woman," he said calmly. "She belongs to us. Open the doors and walk away, or we will kill you." He stated it as a simple, objective fact. If you touch this car, I will call the police. I shot back, gripping my phone in my lap. I will have every sheriff's deputy in the county out here in 10 minutes. The daughter let out a sound that was supposed to be a laugh. The police do not matter. She said, "You should know by now that a normal human does not stand a chance in front of alpha humans like us." Alpha humans. The term sounded utterly ridiculous, yet deeply horrifying coming from her mouth. "We can pull you through this glass," the grandson added. "We can break your bones. We can kill anyone who comes here. We can leave you alive, broken, and no one will ever believe what you say. They will say you lost your mind in the woods." I said, he was right. If I survived, if I told the police that people jumped 50 feet out of a tree and landed on the highway, I would be committed to a psychiatric ward. There would be no investigation. I needed leverage. I looked at the grandson's unblinking eyes. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and forced a cold, hard glare into my expression. "You might be able to kill me," I said, keeping my voice entirely flat. "But you can't kill a server." The grandson tilted his head slightly. The first micro expression I had seen from him, I pointed a stiff finger toward the top center of my windshield, right behind the rearview mirror. "Do you see that black box mounted to the glass? That is a high-definition wide-angle dash camera. It has been recording since I pulled into your driveway." The daughter slowly turned her gaze to look at the small black plastic box. "It recorded you standing on the porch." I continued, speaking rapidly, building the threat. "It recorded you landing on the asphalt without breaking your legs. It is recording you right now." I leaned slightly closer to the gap in the window. "And my agency doesn't use local storage. For social worker safety, that camera streams a live, encrypted feed directly to the county government servers in the main office. The footage is already saved. It is out of this car. If you kill me when I fail to check in, my supervisor will pull the feed. They will see exactly what you are, and they won't send the local police. They will send the federal government, and they will dissect you in a laboratory to find out what makes an alpha human tick." Silence fell over the road. The grandson and the daughter looked at each other. The rigidity in their posture faltered. For the first time, they looked genuinely uncertain. They communicated silently, staring into each other's eyes, processing the threat. "I am offering you a deal," I said, seizing the hesitation. "You step away from this car. You let me and the old woman drive away right now. In exchange, I will go straight to the county office. I will access the primary server, and I will permanently delete the entire recording. I will say nothing to the police and will tell the agency she had a medical emergency and I brought her to the hospital. You go back to your woods and nobody ever comes looking for you." The daughter looked back at me. Her expression was deeply annoyed. The skin around her eyes tightened, a genuine, ugly display of frustration. "You will erase the record," she stated, confirming the terms. "I will erase it from the main server. I promised." The grandson stepped back from the window. "We accept the deal, but understand this. We will watch and we will make sure you commit to it. If the record is seen, we will find you. We have a deal," I said. They turned and walked away from the car, moving to the edge of the dirt road. Without a single sound, they leaped upward, disappearing effortlessly into the thick, dark canopy of the forest above. I did not wait to see if they would come back down. I rolled the window up, hit the accelerator, and drove the rest of the way to the main highway at dangerous speeds. I drove straight to the County General Hospital, then carried the old woman into the emergency room and handed her over to the medical staff. I told the attending physician I found her in a state of severe neglect and that she required immediate protective custody. Then I drove to my agency office. I went directly to the IT department and invoked a critical HIPAA privacy violation. I told the administrator on duty that my dash camera had inadvertently recorded a highly sensitive, unclothed medical emergency during my wellness check, and that the footage was currently sitting on the main server. The threat of a massive county lawsuit made him panic. He logged into the secure terminal and gave me the keyboard to locate and wipe the specific file to contain the breach. I deleted the primary video from the network, exactly as we agreed. But I made a hard copy first, saving it to my own encrypted flash drive right before hitting the delete key. I am writing this now, sitting in my locked apartment, keeping the lights on. I am leaving this story here, as a dead man's switch. If they are watching, if they are tracking my digital footprint to ensure I keep my end of the bargain, I want them to read this very carefully. I kept the video. I kept a record of the address. If I see you standing in the tree line outside my window, or if you ever try to pull another vulnerable person out of this county, I will publish the evidence of your existence to every network on this planet. Stay in the woods. Purgatory isn't quite what I expected. You polished that one off right quick, Cheryl said, taking away the empty dish from my booth. You need a refill on that drink, hun? She asked. Nah, I'm good, Cheryl. Let's just get this over with. Sure thing. I'll be back out in just a minute, she said before heading to the swinging doors that led to the kitchen. I motherfucking hate Applebee's. Between the vintage Americana plastered to every wall and the dim lighting, the place is just damn depressing. Pick a lane and stick to it, I say. If you want to pretend to be a fancy pub, take some of the shit off the walls and maybe get some tables that aren't made from the yellow laminate wood they let kids scribble on in preschool. Oh, and maybe serve me some food that isn't slop from a fucking microwave. I don't mind shitty junk food. In fact, I just might like it too much. But don't take a Pinto and parade it out in front of me calling it a Porsche. I may be dumb, but I'm not stupid, you know? I slammed my fist into said laminate table, earning me a glance from Dick and Balls over at the bar. They were here every damn day, but had never spoken a word to me. Hell, I don't even think I had ever heard them speak to each other. Quick as they had turned my way, they lost interest and went back to nursing their hose water dollaritas, once again fading into background props for the drab locale. Yep, I hated Applebee's, yet here I was. It was better than the alternative. I heard the double doors swing open and saw Cheryl coming down the lane with a large bowl in her hand. As she approached, a faint buzzing began to grow in volume with every step. When she got to my table, she set the bowl in front of me and pulled away the large cloth that had been covering it. The final dish was always served with a showman's flourish. For what reason, I still do not know. Oh my, don't that look good? Cheryl said, looking with genuine adoration at the writhing bowl of black hornets that she had just sat before me. They were packed in tight, dozens upon dozens of the foul creatures. They frantically crawled over one another, buzzing angrily as they skittered, but they didn't leave the confines of the bowl. I sat immobile, staring at the dish. My finger tapped nervously on the table. You know, you could have some if you want, I said to Cheryl, who still loomed beside the table. She always stood and watched me eat. Oh, that's mighty kind, but I could never. That's your dish. You're the customer here. It's just my job to take care of you. Figures. Cheryl loved all the food, but never wanted to eat it. Go on now, she said excitedly. It's gonna get cold. I'm working on it. Just give me a goddamn minute to appreciate my food, okay, Cheryl? I whimpered at the lady, my voice cracking like only half a nut had dropped. Embarrassing, but who would blame me? She put her hands in one of those gestures of faux surrender. The kind you gave when you weren't sorry for what you said, but sorry someone misinterpreted it. My apologies, I just want ya to enjoy it, that's all. Yay. Enjoy it. Okay, Cheryl. Time was a wasting, and if there was one thing I was certain of, it was that sitting there staring at the bowl wouldn't make it go away, so I took a deep breath and reached inside. My hand pulsed with the vibrations of the wings as I raised the ball of fearsome insects and plopped them into my mouth. I started to chew, and the wasps began to sting. White hot pain filled my throat. While I chewed, the wasp's knot instantly ground up between my teeth angrily drove their stingers into my tongue. Some took flight in the small cavern of my mouth and flew down the back of my throat, choking me and piercing the soft walls of my esophagus with their stingers before sinking to acid death awaiting them in my stomach. My eyes watered. I reached into the bowl for another bite, some dropping out from the sides of my mouth when I couldn't fit the whole handful over my now swollen tongue. Cheryl dutifully scooped these escapees away like the discarded peanut shells I had spent my childhood happily throwing on the floor, all the while watching my agony unfold in solemn silence. An unsavory grunting was emanating from my throat now. It hurt to chew. Hell, it hurt to even flex the muscles of my throat. But my gag reflex was on autopilot trying to free itself from the chitinous bits that clung to the back of my tongue like broken husks of popcorn. I tried to swallow my third mouthful of tiny demons and came up short. The wad of chewed bugs hung stuck in the back of my windpipe, refusing to go down. My throat was swelling shut. I retched, I coughed, I wheezed, I even wound up a fist and punched myself in the gut, trying anything to reclaim my open airway, but the multitude of stings were taking hold. With every second I felt the breaths I took grow more shallow. One hand clawed at my throat while the other frantically waved at Cheryl, but I knew that wasn't going to do any good. She just stood by, watching. Panic washed over me, followed by an intense wave of dizziness. I looked at her pleading one last time before smacking face first into my table and spilling the remaining wasps to the floor. Cheryl took her rag and wiped the bugs clean, then picked up the dish and headed back to the kitchen. I awoke with a start and found myself sitting in my booth, the menu already placed in front of me. Every time, it always felt the same. Like you just came to from one of those dreams where you were falling and your whole body jolts to life, still carrying that imagined momentum. Cheryl has already made her way to me. That woman is not a time waster. "What'll it be, hun?" she asks, pouring me a glass of water. "Just start me off at the top of the appetizers, Cheryl. We'll work our way down," I tell her in the tired, monotone voice that has become my norm. "I'll go ahead and bring out the ultimate trio," she says before starting to the back again. "Let's go ahead and bring the nachos too," I call before she's out of earshot. "Any way we can just get all of them out in one big pile?" Cheryl gives it some thought for a moment, then shrugs. "Sure thing, baby. I don't see why not." Did you know that there are 4 fucking nacho platters on the app menu? God forbid a motherfucker with a penchant for corn and decision paralysis ever darkens the door of the establishment. They say variety is the spice of life, but they're wrong. It's a pain in my ass. Now, of course, by this point, I'm sure you all realize that this ain't exactly your run-of-the-mill Applebee's. And for that matter, I'm not your run-of-the-mill patron. I'm fucking dead. Remember all that junk food? Turns out they gave you a big hint right there in the name. That shit just ain't that good for you, and I ate a lot of it. The new generation has a word for it. Stunt food, I think they call it. Burgers stacked so high you can't fit your jaw around them. Or maybe a plate of fries coated in so many layers of meat and cheese that you can't even see the damn spuds. That was my thing. If a restaurant had some type of gimmick entree, I wanted to try it. And try, I did. Often. Too often. Overall, I stayed pretty active. I wasn't even that big of a guy. but all that fat and cholesterol slowly built up on my insides. It sat hidden away, a silent killer choking out my arteries until one day my heart just couldn't keep up. Funnily enough, I had been out at the local park walking my dog when it happened. We got to the uphill portion, and each footstep I took started to feel heavier than the last. I figured I was just really beat, but when my breath began getting shallow, I knew something wasn't right. Another couple of steps, and it felt like someone had tied a rope around my chest and yanked it taut. I was on the ground in seconds. Tater ran around me in frantic dashes, barking, while I curled up, beaten to submission by the waves of squeezing and stabbing pain shooting through my heart. I heard some footsteps rushing up to me before I faded away, but they were too late. I closed my eyes on the world and woke up here at Applebee's. Threw a goddamn fit the first day I was in. Where am I? Where's Tater? What's going on? Got the attention of Dick and Balls, who threw a pair of cursory glances my way from over at the bar. They paused the slow sipping on their cheap margaritas that always seem to be fucking full even though there's not a goddamn bartender in sight, and stared holes into me. Wouldn't speak a word though when I hit them with my spattering of questions. The silence exasperated me further, and my voice got louder and louder till I was full-blown shouting in the empty restaurant. Eventually my hollering mustered Cheryl from the kitchen, but by that point I was already heading for the door. She tried to call out to me, but I wasn't listening. I heard a feint. I wouldn't do that. Before I slammed into that wooden door like a linebacker with 2 gigapascals that knew a scout was in the crowd. The wave of heat that hit me in the face was a shotgun blast. Point blank, straight to the skull. Beads of sweat pooled and evaporated before they could even run down my brow. As I flailed out the door and stumbled over my own feet, I could feel my lips dry and crack on my trip to the ground. I hit a patch of sidewalk and my skin sizzled. The first in a vast collection of injuries sustained at this god-forsaken Applebee's. I leapt to my feet and my eyes grew so wide I expected them to bulge out of their socket. I was standing on a 4x4 block of sidewalk, but a couple good steps away from me, the ground just flat out ended. The Applebee's hung suspended over a gaping pit that burned with a fire the likes of which I had never seen. It made the horizon glow with a deep, hateful shade of orange, and roared with such intensity that it sounded like I was trapped in a wind tunnel. Yet, over the roaring blaze, there was something more. It wasn't the roar of the flame I was hearing, it was screaming. As I looked on in fearful awe, I could see them. Thousands upon thousands of bodies, rolling, writhing, burning. Dripping flesh of magma sloughed off of them as they crawled upon one another, desperately pulling themselves forward, seeking any respite from the blaze. But with every forward motion of one, another slid further down. The process repeated ad infinitum, an ever-ascending ladder of the damned reaching for an impossible destination. I was standing at the precipice of hell. You might want to come back inside. A voice behind me broke me from the stupor and I felt a hand on my shoulder. If you fall, that's it. Done is done, Cheryl said, looking out over the pit with a sad gaze. I didn't need more convincing. I rejoined the waitress and took my spot at the booth that would indefinitely serve as my home. I was a bit more amiable to listen after witnessing the pit, and Cheryl gave me a vague, yet simple explanation of my predicament. I was dead as a doornail. A simple fact that was easy to accept after stepping out that doorway only to find myself at the brink of oblivion. I was dead alright, but that status of my eternal soul, that's where things got confusing. Believe it or not, I was a pretty good fella before I kicked off to the afterlife. Sure, I've got a bit of an attitude now, but you spend your endless days in a lonely Applebee's overhanging eternal hellfire and tell me just how sunny your disposition is. I met just about all the requirements to march my way to the pearly gates. I was a good husband, volunteered at an animal rehab facility, and still called my mama every weekend. Even went to church on a fairly regular basis and put my 10% in the plate every time. I would have been an easy case if it wasn't for that damn stunt food. Gluttony is a deadly sin, folks. And when you have to sign a waiver to eat a burger because it is so damn bad for you, well, that's gluttony. I had lived a good enough life to keep me from the hellfire, but I couldn't just waltz into the pearly gates. My consumption of all that was greasy bullshit was close to willful suicide. I had chosen to abuse my body and I had to repent for my lifestyle. So here I sat. Not in a confessional booth, but one meant to feed a family of 4. Cheryl came out of the kitchen with one of those big platters in hand. She had opted to save time and just had them make my nacho arrangement on the serving tray instead of separate plates. "Here you go. Hung careful now that cheese is hot," she said, placing the mountain of corn chips in front of me. "Anything I can get you?" "No, I'll be good for a while. Thanks, Cheryl," I replied, picking up a chip and starting in on the portion with the spinach dip. It only took a few bites before it hit me. By this point, I knew it was coming. Happened every time, sure as clockwork. But that didn't make it any more pleasant. The all too familiar wave of nausea that came from stuffing oneself a little too close to capacity rolled over me. I belched and felt the acid in my throat. A little bit of spinach dip sputtered out onto my chin. "Let me grab some extra napkins," Cheryl said. She returned a moment later with a small pile of paper towels and passed them to me, then returned to her spot, dutifully watching me suffer. It was always like this. Once I started eating, I immediately felt like I couldn't eat another bite, like there was no more room in my gut for more food. Yet, I always did, and there always was. Acid reflux, nausea, fucking protein farts. For the rest of the meal, I would be assailed by all of it, sitting right on the verge of vomiting. On the rare occasion, I did, usually on purpose, just to buy myself a brief respite from the meal while Cheryl cleaned the table. I don't know the inner workings of divine justice, but from what I could tell, the gist of it was this. I had willfully put my body through the ringer with so much shitty food that now I had to experience the worst of what it would do to my body, day in and day out. According to Cheryl, the goal was to make it through the menu. If I could finish my meal, I could leave. The problem with that was the damn final item. This accursed Applebee's had a special item on the menu, one that I could only order after I finished everything else. It was always a secret, and it was always horrible. The very first time Cheryl ever brought out my final meal, I thought repentance was going to be a piece of cake. 3 blobby fish stared up at me from the plate as Cheryl presented it to me with a big smile. "Ooh, they're so fresh. It's like we just plucked up out of the ocean." She grinned, looking hungrily at the trio. I wasn't the biggest fan of seafood, especially whole and raw, but I was sure I could manage. I started chowing down and thought it was going well, all things considered. Then halfway through fish number 2, my fork clattered to the table. It had slipped out of my grasp as my arm went numb. I tried to pick it back up, but found that I couldn't move. A couple more minutes, and I couldn't breathe. Turns out pufferfish are pretty damn poisonous. Tetrodotoxin it's called. Even the fucking name sounds heinous. Next thing I knew, I was back in the booth, heart racing with that falling sensation, ready to start round 2. The next final meal wasn't so subtle. I did a double take when Cheryl plopped down a shimmering plate of broken glass. I was in utter agony as the micro shards embedded themselves into my gums and scraped at the sensitive roots of my teeth. By the time I had swallowed half of it, my throat was tearing open at the seams. Died a couple minutes later from blood loss. Getting into heaven wasn't going to be an easy task. I fought my hardest, I really did, but there's only so much a man can take before he starts to lose hope. I could make it through the regular menu like clockwork. Nausea be damned. But that final meal, the last hurdle to make it home free, was always too much. I had resigned myself to spending eternity in that booth, yet I kept eating. I had to. Nothing that happened to me in here could possibly be as bad as the pit awaiting outside, and if there was even a sliver of a chance that I made it through the final course, well, how far would you be willing to go for eternal bliss? Sometimes Cheryl would be down for a moment of conversation. It was always a nice break from the monotony. She was business-minded though. I could only keep her gabbing for so long before it was back on the saddle and time to eat again. I polished off the last of the lava cake. What a sorry excuse for a dessert. I'm pretty sure we sold those frozen bricks of chocolate for our school fundraisers back in the day. Guess Applebee's is a fan of fucking education. No child left behind here. All right, Cheryl, I guess it's about that time. Bring me my last supper. She gave me a bit of a frown, but nodded all the same. I had a feeling she wasn't super big on the religious humor. I steeled myself, mentally preparing for whatever horrors awaited. Cheryl was quick on her feet. A few moments passed, and she was already bustling back through the door with a covered tray in hand. It was a big one today. My heart leapt in my chest when she pulled away the covering. It was a rattlesnake. I fucking hated snakes. Had been terrified of them ever since I was a kid, and Tommy Martin, the school shithead, had let a black snake loose behind me in the bathroom. I stood atop the toilet, bawling my eyes out until the janitor heard and came to my rescue. That one had just been a baby, but the one sitting in front of me now was probably 7 feet long. I jumped in my seat when it rattled at me. I could see it following me with those glaring slitted eyes, watching, waiting for me to reach out and touch it, to give it permission. Once I laid my hands on it, it would be free to fuck up my day, and I could tell that it wanted nothing more. The rattle sounded again, shaking right to my bones. Cheryl clapped with glee. Well, isn't that fun? I love novelty desserts so much. Is today your birthday? I wanted to slap that woman, but I was frozen in my seat. Out of all the horrible things I had faced, this was just too much. My hand trembled as I managed to lift it to the table, the rattler's eyes following my every move, its forked tongue flicked excitedly. Go on now, Cheryl said. I couldn't. It's gonna get cold, but I had to. I reached closer, my hand about to make contact. I swear I could see the snake's coils tense with anticipation. Right before brushing along the rough scales, I stopped short. In the throes of desperation, my panic-ridden mind had produced a Hail Mary, an idea so simple that surely it wouldn't work. Cheryl, I can't do it, I said. That last bit of lava cake filled me up. The snake let out another fierce rattle and I continued. It looks so good, but I'm just too full. I've already eaten so much. I should have quit a long time ago. Cheryl gave me a long look. You know, my ma used to always say, the meal's only done when you're full. A soft smile graced the edges of her lips. I'll go get you your check. After all this time, after so many meals, I had bitched, moaned, vomited. Hell, I had died. But I had always kept on going. Never once had I taken a moment to just say, no thank you. Fueled by the desire to free myself, I was further trapped in a prison of my own making. Fucking idiot. I burst into a fit of laughter, a joyful, painful conglomerate of my pent-up agony, and my impending salvation flowed out of me in a fit of giggles. Earned myself the envied third look from Dick and Balls over at the bar. Cheryl came over with my receipt and I hugged the woman. She returned the embrace as I cried into her shoulder. I really fucking hate Applebee's, I said through sobs and sniffles. She patted my back while I bawled. I know, sweetie, let's get you upstairs. That's all for today. Thanks to everyone who watched the video to the end. Subscribe, like, and share your thoughts on today's stories. Thanks for watching. Have a great time.